Good day from ebuzzradio.com, the place to go if you want to know about the world business and the business of the world. I'm Nick von Stein. You can follow us on our live site where we have a daily selection of podcast article uploads as well as music you can listen to on the live stream. Today with me, I have Alan Browning, the Regional Sales Manager of Atvance Intellect. How are you today?
I'm really well, thanks. And yourself, Nick?
It's great to have you with us today. So before we begin, and we're going to be talking about the lack of data skills in South African context, and we're going to be elaborating on that and all of the problems that come out of that. Just tell us a little bit about the work that you do at Atvance Intellect.
So at Advance Intellect, I'm a regional sales manager for South Africa. So obviously post COVID, I mean, we got to travel a lot down to Cape Town and Durban, but my primary responsibility is around business development. I have a fantastic team of technical resources behind me who do the heavy lifting, so it's my opportunity to create opportunities specifically in the data analytics space for my organization.
So let's move over onto the topic then, and that is the lack of skill in data analytics in a South African context. Where would you like to begin the conversation?
So I'd like to begin it with, if you just do a very basic search, I mean, I think the one thing that everybody is in full agreement with is that data is being seen as the fifth industrial revolution. However, I think the disconnect that we're starting to see from the market is that we're seeing that the advertising and the number of job opportunities for people who will specialize in data analytics is not necessarily matching, the demand that seems to be created out there in the market, which I personally find is quite troublesome. And I think that's something I would like to address as we go through this conversation.
There's a tech gap in this country between the haves and the have-nots, and that's one spot to begin. There's also an age gap. There's so many different ways you could look at it. Absolutely.
I mean, I agree with you on all those points. I mean, I think it would be quite relevant just to maybe just take a step back and just to look at what are the, being touted as what are the five major technologies that are being adopted at a massive rate at the moment, and some in a stage of implementation, some in a stage of to be implemented, which is going to drive this massive drive towards data. I mean, the first one I'd like to start off with is mentioning 5G. I think there's been a lot of noise around 5G, and it's definitely a technology that needs to be developed to make data more, and the speed that it's going to offer is something that's going to be incredibly key in terms of making data the next big driving force in the markets. The other ones that I want to touch on would be artificial intelligence, or what I prefer to talk about under the AI banner would be more of the augmented intelligence. I think AI is misunderstood as a conversation. I mean, I think a lot of people think that it's going to be very much like, robots are going to start replacing human beings. I don't particularly see that. I see it more as augmented intelligence, where computers will help people make better, more informed decisions just purely by the volume of data. Human minds aren't going to be able to go through that data at the speed needed, and then we'll rely on the algorithms to actually make that data start making sense, which touches nicely onto machine learning. The third major thing that we see that's going to be driving data as one of the next data waves is certainly around the Internet of Things. And I think this has been probably something for the last 10 years that we've started monitoring it, and we started seeing that there's an influx in terms of the amount of Internet of Things devices that are now connected. If you look at some of the forecasts that are available at the moment, currently, depending which source you take, I mean, there's roughly about 7.2 billion people on the Earth, and they're predicting by 2022 there's going to be 22 billion devices connected to the internet, which are obviously going to be, creating huge amounts of data. The next one would be edge computing, which ties in quite interestingly to the speeds that are going to be needed to process this data in real time. And that talks nicely to blockchain, where we're going to be looking at, how do we securely move all this data throughout the world and still retain the value of it. And then if we start looking at what human beings are doing, if you put the human element, this isn't a technology choice, this would be very much more around the consumer sophistication. I think we see this in all aspects of our lives where, a lot of people are becoming online doctors. If you start coughing or feeling ill, people will go and do a diagnosis before they actually go through to the doctor. And again, this is again going to start driving a lot of data, and this is why it is such a relevant topic.
And obviously there are a lot of people's fears that I could bring up in regards to all this tech that's coming up. People are scared of their jobs. People are scared for, excuse me, people are scared just because of this lack of literacy. And that's something that we need to change over in a South African context. What do you think are some of the things that both individuals and the government could do to help address this issue?
So I think it's not only a South African problem. I think it's a global problem. I think if you just look back, I mean, you mentioned the age gap, which is obviously one of the challenges around this in the previous question. I think if you look at the way people are brought up, I mean, you're told to keep your job, not to move around too much, not to create too much drama in the workplace, just to put your head down, do your job, and eventually your reward will come. The reality is that it's not like that anymore. I mean, we as technologists, our biggest drive should be constantly trying to put ourselves out of jobs. If we are true and passionate about what we're doing, we should always be looking for ways to replace ourselves, whether that is with technology or actually just by creating things in our organizations where people who are reporting to us you're fully equipping those people to actually replace you, and then you can naturally move up. So I think the societal and generational issue around the fact that have your job and then make yourself indispensable so that you don't lose your job, I think that fundamentally has to change. And then the second part of your question, you did touch on the government. It's something I'm incredibly passionate about. I mean, as I move into my mid-40s, I've started seeing that the bigger jobs that are going to be created in the market, I think what the government is doing well, if you look at some of the curriculums in the schools, they're starting to talk very much around, schools are starting to teach kids how to code from a really, really young age. However, I believe that the jobs of the future, it's not going to be about coding. I mean, at the moment, if you look at how people are taught to code, it's very much, you're taught to code in logic, which is, the if, then, or else. But the real jobs that are going to be important going forward are going to be around mathematicians to actually interpret all this data that's being created. And I think that's something we need to do as a country, and certainly as a government. We need to start looking at improving the matriculation pass mark for mathematics and for the sciences, because this is essentially what's going to become the jobs of the future moving forward.
And, we were, for the listeners that are listening to this now, we had a previous conversation yesterday with Alan, where we were just discussing how we were going to come about this and go about this topic. And eventually we got onto the subject of statistics. And it turns out that I am not the greatest at making statistics. I'm great at interpreting them. But, to be honest, I'm, without being arrogant, I'm an intelligent person, but there's some things I cannot do, and that's one of them. And so it's those type of fears and scares that cause this lack of information, and that's what's going to change things in the future. I wanted to know then, what type of jobs do you think we'll be seeing coming out in the next few years? It's very difficult to allay people's fears that their jobs are going to be replaced by this monolithic AI.
So I think that's a great question, and I think the easiest way to answer that is just to take people's experience into account. I mean, I've been in IT now since 1998, and if I look at the last 5 jobs that I had when I matriculated in 1992, none of those jobs ever existed. I mean, if I just take some of the crazy job titles I've had in my IT career, I've been a cloud evangelist for talking about public cloud. I've been a virtualization specialist. I've been now I'm a analytics specialist. A lot of the jobs that I've done never existed when people came out of school. So I think, to be perfectly honest, if you look at what I see as the key jobs going forward, I think it's quite an interesting roadmap in terms of getting to the pinnacle of being true blue thoroughbred person in the data space. I think obviously the holy grail is when people get to the data scientist level. If you look at an organization like Microsoft, for example, I think they identified in a report I read not too long ago that they have a gap for 200,000 data scientists that they need to recruit to work for just Microsoft alone, and that will obviously be increased if you start thinking about some of the bigger global cloud providers like Amazon and those sort of people. But for me, it's very much around a path in terms of what we need to start doing, and this is what we start needing to start advertising for people in the jobs of data analysts, for example. Machine learning engineers are going to become key. Deep learning engineers are key, and then obviously a data engineer, which will then roll up into your data scientists. So these are going to become what I see as the major roles that are going to need to be created. And then furthermore, throughout a lot of our customers, I think, to be honest, the key role is going to be a C-level role reporting directly into the board, which is going to be called a CDO, which is going to have many different interpretations. Some will call it your Chief Digitalization Officer, some will call it your Chief Data Officer, but I honestly believe that the role of a CDO, whatever the description is, will become a fundamentally crucial role for organizations moving forward.
Oh, I always like it when new terms are invented. CDO, I must remember that one for the future.
Sure.
Do you think, we could give ourselves such a major competitive advantage in this country if we could just get on board with tech and cyber going forward? But, and I think it might be generational, maybe something that's to discuss. I speak to younger South Africans and they get it. But then you speak to someone in their late 40s onwards and it's like a brick wall.
Exactly, and unfortunately that's just the, and it's something I'm very passionate about. I mean, if I just look at the way organizations are structured, I mean, it's still fundamentally different, that, younger people aren't necessarily getting the seat at the table. I mean, if you look at what's driving technology in the United States, I mean, if you look at most of the successful CIOs or CTOs in America at the moment, most of those kids are, between the ages of 18 and 21. It's these really smart kids coming out of Stanford and Harvard and all these great business schools and universities, and are taking a seat straight at the table in the C-level, and they're inventing technology literally overnight. Whereas we tend to work in such a way that, you start inside an organization, you then have to almost wear your stripes, I mean, very much like an apprentice type program. And then as you get into your mid-40s, you get to a point where you start, moving into middle management, and you start, getting some of the C-level roles. The challenge then becomes that if you look at the way the organizations are structured, I mean, if you look at IT, it's still being deployed the same way it was being deployed 20 years ago, with this 3-tier architecture, where one year they'll refresh the networking stack, the next year they'll refresh the compute stack, and then the year after that they will then refresh the storage stack, and then in the fourth year they repeat the business. So getting access to funds in a particular area for an organization when it's not one of the budgeting cycles, it becomes a challenge. And the reality is data is complex. And a lot of people, as they start moving into, coming towards the end of their careers, are not prepared to make a big decision because, it becomes uncomfortable to make a massive change. And it's always easy just to do what's simple. And what we're starting to find is, slightly older people are starting to almost take an ostrich approach on how to deal with this fifth industrial revolution, which is data, and just bury their head in the sand and just hope that, if they just ignore it, it will go away, or potentially, it will be taken on by somebody younger, and they can just happily retire.
And that brings us back full circle over to the lack of data skills in the country, because if people had these skills and they had an idea of the power that you can use data for, everyone would be embracing it and jumping on board, and there wouldn't be this apprehension and this hesitancy that we see.
Absolutely correct. I mean, it is that, and the reality is, it's very easy to pay lip service to a new technology. I mean, a lot of organizations may have a conversation and say, the one thing that we're starting to find is companies, in certain pharmaceutical customers that I've worked with, if I ask them, what is your feelings on data, and they're like, oh, well, we've just employed a data scientist straight out of university. And then you meet with the data scientist and you start asking them, what sort of tools are you using to, do your data scientist work? And generally, they'll say, well, we're using Excel, for example. I mean, and that's almost crazy. I mean, it's why would you employ such a brilliant mind and such a great resource and then not give them the tools to
them
do
on
their
Excel,
job?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just crazy. And I think what's going to drive data very much is the way you're going to differentiate your business moving into the future is we're actually at a point now where we need to start ingesting real-world data in real time. And I think that becomes a conundrum. The only way you're going to do that is you can't give a really smart brain straight out of school or university access to a tool where they spend 50% of their day having to clean the data and actually having to interpret the data. And then after 3 months of, fixing really, really badly unstructured data, or maybe there was information missing out of a table, and then forcing them to go and find out what the information is they're missing, to then expect them to make a real-time decision when they've spent 3 months building a data model, because the reality is by the time that data model is built 3 months later, it's probably irrelevant because that's how quick the technology world is moving at the moment.
How do you think people respond to the pace of the change? Because I think that's what throws a lot of people off.
Exactly. I mean, I think it is that. I mean, if you look at machine data, for example, I mean, machine data is very complex. However, it's also really, really valuable. So the way people are reacting to the change, if I take what's happening with just the speed that these solutions are being delivered, I almost get the feeling that we're getting to a point where the technology is outstripping the ability of human beings to respond to the change in a way that fundamentally makes sense to them. And I think what's starting to happen now is that's why you're getting a lot of people who would rather just ignore the change rather than embracing the change, being put in that uncomfortable position and actually going and learning a new skill. So I think we're very much on a tipping point where when technology evolves at such a rapid rate and people are not able to keep up with that change, we almost are creating a lost generation right from the beginning.
Alan, is there anything else you'd like to add in closing?
Absolutely. Just the final thing. I mean, to be honest, I've been fortunate enough in my career to have lived through quite a number of technological changes. I mean, that was through the virtualization change, which fundamentally shaped the way data centers are deployed and the way machines are actually built and just the number of servers that are available. Then obviously went through the cloud phase. And honestly now moving into this data phase, it is the probably most exciting part. I mean, if you think of the value of what we can do with the ability to change a lot of what is happening in the world, by having sensors, by having data, by having all these IoT devices spread out throughout the world, I think we're actually at the tipping point where IT can now absolutely 100% improve just about every societal problem that exists in the world today. So we just need to learn to embrace it. We need organizations to take it seriously, as I said earlier, and we need companies to start, appointing people, as I said, in executive positions purely to have a proper mapped out data strategy going forward.
And lastly, Alan, some contact details and social media information for Atvance Intellect.
So absolutely. I mean, so please go and check us out at www.advance.tech. We've just redone our website. You'll find everything on there. You'll find our contact details there, and please get in touch with us. We also are on YouTube. So please go to our YouTube channel, check it out, and subscribe there, and you'll see some interesting content being uploaded there on a regular basis.
Alan Browning, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Nick. It was great chatting to you. Hope you found it of value.